How did Native Americans start fires in the pouring rain and freezing cold? Their methods are shocking, and now you can learn all their secrets. Imagine an ice storm on the Great Plains or torrential rain in the forests of the Northeast. There is nothing around but wet trees and piercing cold. In such conditions, a modern person without matches or a lighter would be doomed. However, the indigenous peoples of North America survived in these harsh realities for centuries. For them, making fire in the heaviest downpour or snowfall was not a miracle, but a honed skill. It was a system based on a deep understanding of nature, patience, and ingenious preparation. They knew how to get a spark from a stone and how to make wood that appeared wet smolder. Their methods were so reliable that they could produce a flame in situations that we would consider hopeless. Watch the video to the end to find out exactly what materials they used as tinder and how they managed to find completely dry fuel under a thick layer of snow. What if I told you that for Native Americans, fire was not just a chemical reaction, but a living being? Before we can understand how they lit a fire, we must understand what it meant to them. It was not just a tool for warmth or cooking, but a sacred element that demanded respect. The process of obtaining fire was almost ritualistic. It was not an act of conquering nature, but of cooperating with it. It was believed that fire should not be forced to appear, but invited or persuaded. This attitude fundamentally changed the approach to the task. It required a person to be unhurried, focused, and pay absolute attention to detail. Every movement in obtaining fire by friction was measured and deliberate. Failure was not perceived as a technical error. It meant that the person was not sufficiently prepared or had shown disrespect. Therefore, preparation for the process was more important than the process itself. In the icy tundra or damp forest, this psychological attitude was key to survival. It provided the patience necessary to monotonously rub sticks together until a precious ember appeared. It was meditation, not work. Fire was the center of social life, a place to gather and tell stories. Losing fire meant losing the center of one's small world. Therefore, the ability to revive it from nothing was one of the most important skills. This philosophy turned survival into an art. It taught that to succeed, one must not fight the elements, but understand their laws. Only by accepting the cold and dampness could one find a way to create warmth. They believed that every tree had its own spirit that could help or hinder. For example, cedar and juniper were considered particularly friendly for making fire. Their dry inner bark and wood were highly prized. This respectful approach ensured that every detail was taken into account. They didn't just look for dry wood, they looked for the right wood. They knew that fire is capricious and demands the best. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this almost spiritual approach to what seems like a utilitarian task? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on other secrets of ancient cultures. I will reveal the most reliable secret of creating fire without matches. Of all the methods of obtaining fire by friction, the bow drill or fire bow was the most effective and widespread. This mechanism allowed for high rotational speeds that were not possible with simple friction between the palms. The design was simple but required careful selection of materials. It consisted of four main parts. These were the bow itself, the drill, the support board, and a small upper stop. The bow was a flexible branch with a string made of rawhide or strong plant fiber. It did not need to be powerful, as for shooting, but only to provide rotation. The string was wrapped once around the drill. The drill was a straight, dry stick made of hard wood. Its lower end was pointed and its upper end was rounded. This was the most important part, which created the smoldering powder. The support board, or hearth, was made of softer wood, such as willow, poplar, or cedar. A small recess was cut into it for the drill. Next to the recess, a V-shaped notch was made to catch the hot powder. The upper stop was needed to hold the drill vertically and press it against the board. It was made of stone with a recess, hardwood, or bone. It allowed pressure to be applied to the drill without burning or rubbing the hand. The process required skill and the correct posture. The person knelt on one knee, pressing the support board to the ground with their foot. With one hand, they held the upper stop, and with the other, they quickly moved the bow back and forth. The friction not only heated the board, but also drilled fine wood dust out of it. This dust accumulated in a V-shaped notch. When the desired temperature of about 400 degrees was reached, the dust began to smolder. The result was a small but very hot black ember. This ember was the first step towards a real flame. It had to be immediately transferred to a pre-prepared tinder. This method was universal for different regions. It was used by the peoples of the Great Plains and the tribes of the Eastern Woods. The main thing was to find suitable dry materials, which was a separate task in bad weather. But what if I told you that this ember is completely useless without its main partner? The real secret was not in making the ember, but in catching it in a material that could smolder for hours. In the next chapter, we will reveal the secrets of ancient tinder that people carried with them for weeks. What I am about to show you was more valuable than any tool. The ember obtained from a bow drill was incredibly fragile. It needed a material that could catch that weak spark and turn it into a steady smolder. That material is tinder. Indigenous peoples were true masters at finding and preparing tinder. They didn't just take dry grass, which could become damp within an hour. They created materials with unique properties. One of the most valuable sources of tinder was tinder fungi growing on trees. But not the entire fungus was suitable. Only the inner, spongy part, known as the tremia, was used. This material was carefully dried. Sometimes it was boiled in water with ash to make it more susceptible to fire. Then it was kneaded and fluffed up to the consistency of soft suede. This mushroom tinder had an amazing property. It did not ignite immediately, but began to smolder slowly from the slightest spark. This smoldering was very stable, difficult to extinguish by the wind, and produced intense heat. Another first-class material was the inner, dry bark of certain trees, for example, juniper or cedar. It was stripped off and kneaded in the hands for a long time until it turned into a soft, fluffy fiber. This fluff was ideal for catching sparks. It ignited instantly, but also burned out quickly. Therefore, it was often used in combination with mushroom tinder. First, the spark fell on the fluff, and then the smoldering mushroom was lit from it. Preparing tinder was a painstaking task that was done in dry weather. The finished material was stored in special bags or containers. These containers were made of leather or tightly woven fibers to protect the precious tinder from the slightest moisture. It was this prepared supply that was the key to starting a fire in rain or snow. While everything around was wet, a person had completely dry, ready-to-use material in their bag. It was a strategic reserve. Such a smoldering fungus could even be carried around. Placed in a container with air holes, such as a shell or clay pot, it could be carried for hours. This made it possible to transfer the fire from one campsite to another without having to rekindle it. Ready for the shocking truth? The method of striking sparks is much older than you think. Although the bow drill was reliable, it required several components and time. In some regions, especially where there was little suitable wood, another method was preferred: impact. We are not talking about the flint in steel we are familiar with. Before contact with Europeans, indigenous peoples did not have steel. Instead, they used another mineral, pyrite or firestone. Pyrite is an iron sulfide, a stone that produces a shower of bright, hot sparks when struck against flint. Flint, or any other very hard stone with a sharp edge, served as a flint. The strike had to be sliding and sharp. This method was technically more difficult than using steel. Sparks from pyrite are not as hot and long-lasting. They required even higher quality and drier tinder to catch them. Most often, charred cloth or very dry mushroom powder was used in this case. The tinder was held directly under the point of impact so that the spark would fall directly onto it. This required great precision and a steady hand. With the arrival of Europeans, the situation changed dramatically. They brought with them steel flints, small metal plates. Striking steel against flint produced a much more powerful and hotter spark. Indigenous peoples quickly appreciated this advantage. The steel striker became one of the most sought-after items for trade. It was compact, durable, and incredibly reliable. A set consisting of a striker, a piece of flint, and a container with tinder became standard equipment for warriors and hunters. It could be used with one hand while squatting under a cloak in the pouring rain. This was a huge technological advantage. Unlike a bow drill, the striking method did not require dry wood for the tools themselves. Stone and steel were not affected by moisture. The main task was simply to keep a small bundle of tinder dry. This method replaced many ancient methods. It was faster, easier, and worked in almost any conditions. But even with a steel flint, there was still a major problem to solve. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with the most difficult task, finding dry fuel in a wet forest. So the charcoal was obtained and the tinder began to smolder. Now the most difficult part begins, requiring knowledge and patience. They had to turn this smoldering into a flame, using fuel that was soaked through by rain or covered with snow. The first rule of survival, known to indigenous peoples, was to never take fuel from the ground. Branches lying on the ground will always be the wettest. They absorb moisture like a sponge. They looked for what is known as standing deadwood. These were dead trees or dry branches that had not yet fallen. Water runs off them, but they do not absorb as much as those lying on the ground. The lower dry branches of coniferous trees were especially prized. The dense crown of a spruce or pine tree often serves as a natural umbrella. The branches closest to the trunk can remain relatively dry, even in heavy rain. When everything around was covered with snow, the task became more difficult, but not impossible. They knew that snow is a good insulator. Under deep snow drifts at the base of a tree trunk, it was often possible to find dry leaves and small twigs, but the real treasure was inside the dead tree. Even if the trunk of a standing dead tree was wet on the outside, its core often remained dry. Using stone and later metal tools, they scraped off the wet outer layer. Once they reached the dry wood, they began to scrape off small shavings. These shavings were the first fuel for the flame. They were much larger than tinder, but thin enough to catch fire from a smoldering ember. They also looked for resin from coniferous trees. Resin is a natural combustible material. A piece of resin added to tinder produced a hot, hissing flame capable of igniting even slightly damp twigs. Another source was thin strips of bark. Birch bark, for example, contains tar and burns even when wet. It was carefully removed without damaging the living tree and used for kindling. After gathering a bundle of shavings, dry bark, and resin, it was carefully brought to the smoldering tinder. Then they began to blow slowly and smoothly. This moment required a special skill. Too weak a stream of air did not produce fire. Too strong a stream extinguished the precious ember. Here's what happens behind the scenes of survival that is rarely talked about. What to do if even standing dead wood has become damp? Indigenous peoples used two ingenious techniques to dry fuel: the heat of their own bodies and the heat of the fire itself. If a hunter knew he was going to have to spend the night in wet weather, he would prepare in advance. During the day, he would collect small dry twigs and tinder that he found in sheltered places. He didn't just put these materials in a bag. He placed them in his inside pockets or under his clothes. The constant dry heat of his own body evaporated the residual moisture from the wood within a few hours. By evening, he had ready-made, completely dry kindling. This method was especially important in subarctic regions. The Cree and Athabascan peoples, who lived in extreme cold, always carried a supply of tinder with them. It was their insurance against the cold. But what to do when the fire is already burning, but it is small and smoky, and all the wood around is wet? They did not put wet logs directly into the fire. That would inevitably extinguish it. Instead, they built a small grate or platform over the fire. They placed larger, wet branches on this platform. The heat rising from the fire began to slowly dry them. You could see steam rising from the wet logs at first. This was the moisture evaporating. As soon as the steam stopped, the branch was ready to be moved into the flames. This process required constant attention. It was necessary to add a new batch of wet wood for drying at the right time and move the already dried wood into the fire. It was a continuous cycle that turned raw wood into a source of heat. They also used reflectors. A wall of logs or stones placed behind the fire not only protected against the wind, it reflected the heat back, helping to dry the fuel and warm people. This system allowed the fire to be maintained for hours and even days. Using the wet fuel that surrounded them, they created a steady flame. They did not depend on finding perfectly dry firewood. These two techniques, drying on the body and drying over the fire, were the basis for survival in bad weather. In the next chapter, we will look at how they prepared their tools for such challenges in advance. Success in starting a fire in extreme conditions depended not only on skill, but also on preparation. Every hunter or warrior, when leaving camp, carried a personal fire kit with him. It was his most valuable tool, which he guarded like the apple of his eye. The contents of the kit varied depending on the tribe and region. In forested areas, it might include the components of a bow drill. In the plains, where wood was scarcer, a striking kit was more common. The bow drill kit included the drill itself, a small upper stop, and sometimes a support board. The bow was often made on the spot from a suitable branch. All wooden parts were kept dry. The striking set was more compact. It consisted of a piece of flint, a steel striker, and most importantly, a container with tinder. All this was placed in a small leather pouch that was worn around the neck or on a belt. The tinder container was a key element. It had to be as waterproof as possible. It was made of several layers of fat-soaked leather or tightly closed wooden boxes. The container held not one, but several types of tinder. There was the main slow-burning material, such as tinder fungus, and next to it was material for quick ignition. Plant fluff or bark scrapings. Often, a small accelerator was added to the kit. This could be a lump of coniferous tree resin or a bundle of fibers soaked in fat. Losing this kit was tantamount to disaster. A person could lose their weapons or food, but losing their fire kit in bad weather threatened their very survival. This item was treated with the utmost care. Having a ready-made kit saved precious time. There was no need to search for drill materials or dry tinder in a blizzard or downpour. Everything necessary was already with them, dry and ready to use. This shows a level of foresight and planning. Indigenous peoples did not hope for good weather. They were always prepared for the worst-case scenario. Building a fire in deep snow had its own peculiarities. The main problem was that a fire burning directly on the snow quickly melted it. As a result, the fire simply sank into the resulting puddle of water and went out. The indigenous peoples of the subarctic and northern plains were aware of this effect. Therefore, they never lit a fire directly on the surface of a snowdrift. First, they prepared a special platform for it. If the snow was not deep, they cleared it down to the ground. This created a dry, solid base. But if the snowdrifts were a meter deep, digging down to the ground was too labor-intensive. In this case, they did something else. They trampled the area in the snow, making it as compact as possible. Then they laid a layer of thick, wet branches or logs on top of it. This layer served as insulation. It prevented the fire from coming into direct contact with the snow. The fire was lit on this wooden platform. The wet logs at the base did not catch fire, but slowly smoldered and dried out from the heat. The platform gradually sank, but the fire remained dry. This allowed the fire to be kept burning for hours. Another important element was protection from the wind. In open snow-covered areas, the wind was the main enemy of fire. It blew away the heat and could extinguish the flames at the very beginning. For protection, they dug snow pits or built walls out of snow blocks. Snow, paradoxically, was an excellent building material. It blocked the wind and even reflected some of the heat back to the fire. It was easier in the forest. They lit fires at the foot of large trees, where there was less snow, or under the thick branches of fir trees, which protected them from both the wind and falling snow. This knowledge allowed them to feel confident in the harshest winter conditions. Fire on the snow was not just a source of heat, it was the center of life in the middle of an icy desert. Heavy rain presented a different problem than snow. Water was everywhere, running down tree trunks, dripping from leaves and soaking everything. Finding a dry place was a priority. Rock overhangs or the dense crowns of large trees provided ideal shelter. Coniferous trees, especially spruce trees with their dense lower branches, created an umbrella. Under such shelter, the ground could remain almost dry. This is where the search for materials began. They looked for tinder in the most sheltered places. This could be dry litter at the base of a tree trunk or dust from cracks in the wood. Bark was their best friend in the rain. The outer layer of bark might be wet, but dry fibers were often hidden underneath. Birch bark was especially valuable because its thin layers burned even when wet. They scraped the thinnest shavings from the leeward side of standing deadwood. This side often remained drier. The tools had to be very sharp to remove shavings rather than splinters. The process of kindling itself required protection. The person would sit down, covering themselves with a cloak or a cape made of animal skins. They created a micro-shelter for their fire kit and tinder. All operations were carried out under this protection. When the tinder began to smolder, it was immediately covered from dripping water. The thinnest, driest shavings were placed on top of it. As soon as the first faint flame appeared, it had to be fed very carefully. First came the smallest twigs, the size of a needle, then thicker twigs, and so on, gradually increasing in size. This process was called building a fire. It resembled the construction of a pyramid, from the smallest to the largest. Any haste or too large wet branch could ruin the whole thing. The fire, born in the rain, was smoky and capricious. But as soon as it gained strength, it began to dry the fuel around it. The main thing was to survive the first, most critical minutes. Native Americans' knowledge of fire-making is not just a set of tricks. It is a holistic system deeply integrated into their lives and culture. It included botany, physics, meteorology, and vast practical experience. They knew exactly which wood was best for the drill and which was best for the backing board. They could distinguish between dozens of types of mushrooms and mosses, knowing which ones could be used for tinder. They could read the landscape, instantly finding places sheltered from wind and rain. This skill was as natural as breathing. It was passed down from generation to generation. The ability to make fire in any conditions was one of the main signs of an adult and independent person. Fire was not only for warmth, it was needed for cooking food, sharpening tools, and signaling over long distances. Without fire, life in a harsh climate would have been impossible. Today, these skills have been almost completely lost. We rely on technologies that render us helpless in their absence. A simple lighter replaces years of observation and practice. By studying these ancient methods, we are not just learning about the past, we are touching on a different way of thinking. A world where man was not the king of nature, but its attentive and skilled student. Fire, produced by friction in the pouring rain, was a symbol of this harmony. It was proof that knowledge and patience could overcome cold and dampness. It was an art honed by millennia of survival. Modern reenactors spend weeks trying to replicate what Native Americans did in a matter of minutes. This shows how much knowledge we have lost, and how important it is to remember those who mastered this art. We can see that making fire in bad weather was not a miracle, but the result of incredible preparation, deep knowledge, and a special attitude toward the world. From choosing the right mushroom for tinder to finding dry wood in a wet tree, every step was calculated and precise. It was a system in which no detail was insignificant. These skills allowed indigenous peoples to live where life would seem impossible. They proved that human ingenuity and adaptability know no bounds. This is a harsh but important lesson from our past. What other aspects of Native American life or survival would you like to see in future videos? Perhaps you are interested in their clothing, hunting methods, or housing construction? Suggest your topics in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into forgotten technologies and ancient cultures.